this is the biggest panel I've seen all morning. And I do know that we do have somebody with a timer here who will be making sure to time this panel so that we don't go over our lunchtime. My name is Spunga Alwa. I'm from the South African National Editors Forum and the African Editors Forum. I think this next topic is a good one in that it follows right after that robust debate that took place earlier on, where we heard about how the unfettered power of these big tech companies undermine the sovereignty and the stability of nations. And I think that that brings us into the good topic of AI. And I think that while we all agree that there are fears in media, in our fraternity about AI, there are also we identify the opportunities that exist for us. I think in trying to unpack those, we've got this panel here who will help us unravel some of these issues. And because I do know that one of the things that boggles my mind is the fact that you have these big cases on copyright infringement that are before the courts. And I think Courtney spent a lot of time talking about how some of these deals that are licensing deals that are being cut between big publishers and AI companies, and how much they destabilize our industry. So then I guess then the question that we also have to answer is, what do we do as the media in the global south? Do we sit back and hope that there will be a solution that suits all of us, or do we find a way to play a role and in a way react to some of these? I don't have all the answers. I do have a high-powered delegation that will help us unravel some of these. And I think I will start from my immediate left. All right. And allow our first speaker, which would be Marina Peter. And Marina has 10 years experience working on public policies and advocacy related to the internet, social communication and telecommunications, especially in civil society and in civil society organizations. She's currently the director of freedom of expression and combating misinformation at the Digital Policy Secretariat of the Secretary of Communications of the Presidency of the Republic. That's quite a mouthful. But I guess, if anything, that tells us that Marina is actually the best person to kick us off in this particular debate. Over to you, Marina.
Eu vou falar em português. Que bom. Obrigada por colocar a apresentação. Eu queria só começar agradecendo muito a oportunidade de estar aqui, dizer para as organizadoras que é uma felicidade poder estar entre tantas pessoas qualificadas, e isso é fundamental para a continuidade do nosso trabalho. Nós somos uma secretaria que tem a atribuição de promover a sustentabilidade do jornalismo, isso é inédito, e é um desafio enorme você sair, digamos, do zero. E todas as conversas, tudo que eu tenho ouvido aqui só me traz mais capacidade e ânimo para seguir nessa jornada na Secretaria de Políticas Digitais. Eu vou fazer uma apresentação muito breve e depois a gente, enfim, segue. Nossa missão é proteger e promover a integridade da informação como elemento central para a proteção e promoção de direitos individuais, coletivos e a democracia. Essa é a missão da Secretaria de Políticas Digitais. Como boa parte de vocês sabem, a gente tem trabalhado muito ativamente dentro do governo para a construção de um modelo de regulação de inteligência artificial no Brasil que promova a sustentabilidade não só do jornalismo, mas também da indústria criativa como um todo. Esse trabalho só é possível porque a gente tem organizações de jornalismo no Brasil que nos apoiam, que fazem a incidência no Congresso. Então, eu diria que esse é um resultado muito positivo. O projeto de lei foi aprovado no Senado e agora passará a ser analisado na Câmara. Nós estamos muito atentos a esse novo momento, digamos, de análise do projeto e com certeza, gostaríamos de manter essa coalizão grande com a sociedade civil para essa defesa. Então, o PL de inteligência artificial que está tramitando hoje tem vou salientar alguns pontos principais. estamos à disposição aí para entrar em mais detalhes, mas ele traz a obrigação de transparência, né? O desenvolvedor de IA tem a obrigação de informar quais conteúdos protegidos foram utilizados, tem uma exceção para uso de obras para o jornalismo, então, quer dizer, o PL prevê um nível de exceção da aplicação de direitos autorais e o jornalismo está ali. O direito à negativa, né, de proibir a utilização de conteúdos, a proteção contra discriminação e tratamento abusivo no caso de negativa, que é uma coisa que foi, inclusive, a partir do nosso diálogo com a sociedade civil, que nós colocamos no texto, e o direito à remuneração, e aí, enfim, todos os detalhes que a gente tem. Eu queria trazer um outro elemento, que é, a partir da discussão que a gente fez com o Ministério da Igualdade Racial, a Secretaria de Comunicação Social da Presidência da República aprovou um plano de comunicação pela igualdade racial, que tem, entre outras ações, o fomento às mídias negras. A partir desse plano, a gente desenvolveu um projeto, a gente já identificava que o jornalismo precisava de um apoio robusto em termos de tecnologia, em termos de entendimento do ecossistema global na perspectiva digital, da publicidade digital, que foi dito aqui, e, inclusive, a gente produzir elementos para a incidência na própria política pública. A gente construiu, digamos, um projeto que chama Incubadoras de Mídias Negras Periféricas e Independentes, que é um projeto para subsidiar políticas públicas. A gente apresentou, enquanto SECOM, para o MCTI, a partir de um edital específico para desenvolvimento de evidências para políticas públicas. Um projeto foi aprovado pelo Conselho do Fundo Nacional de Ciência e Tecnologia em dezembro de 2024. E aí ele vai ter uma operação via CNPq. Enfim, ele tem um orçamento inicial de 15 milhões, a gente tem 2 anos para executar. Gente, essa apresentação vai estar disponível para vocês. O documento que foi aprovado é público, a gente pode compartilhar. A gente está num momento bastante desafiador de concluir esse processo, de ter acesso a esse recurso, que é desenhar o modelo institucional, jurídico de repasse dos recursos, até porque a gente prevê que esses recursos também vão para as organizações que já pesquisam jornalismo, que estão pensando. Então, quando a gente apresentou o projeto, vocês não sabem, mas vocês já são parceiros do projeto. Muitas das organizações que estão aqui já estão listadas como potenciais parceiras, e é muito bom poder falar isso aqui, porque me poupa bastante tempo de ligar para cada um de vocês e falar, viu, a gente precisa conversar sobre o projeto. E a gente vai entrar numa fase de detalhamento, e eu fiquei muito satisfeita, porque desse debate a gente já tem aí uma perspectiva do que a gente precisa encomendar em termos de pesquisas. E aí, enfim, acho que eu não vou passar muito entrar nos detalhes do projeto, eu posso compartilhar ele mesmo com vocês. Mas, enfim, o objetivo geral é promover pesquisa, inclusive pesquisa aplicada, no sentido da gente testar modelos, testar soluções, já com veículos, produção de reconhecimento e recomendações com base em evidências para desenvolvimento da política pública para a promoção da sustentabilidade, da produção e disseminação de jornalismo negro, periférico e independente e de informação de interesse público no Brasil. Então, quando o Chico estava falando aqui de disseminação, cabe. A gente está falando de como é que a gente vai usar a inteligência artificial, não para o produto, mas assim no back-office, ou enfim, quais são. Cabe. Então, a gente precisa entender, inclusive, quais são as necessidades. No momento em que isso for possível, eu vou avisar, a gente ainda está nesse arranjo jurídico aí. Eu acho que esse projeto ele é muito importante, porque a gente precisa reconhecer que a inovação é uma atividade de alto risco, no sentido de alto nível de incerteza. E essas conversas e o papel do governo em ajudar num tipo de diálogo e coordenação para que os recursos, que são bastante limitados, sejam aplicados nas direções que a gente considera mais adequadas, é muito relevante. O Estado também pode apoiar a padronização, a criação de instituições, e aí, nesse sentido, eu queria dizer que a gente tem um papel bastante relevante de sair do mundo Napster. E aí, fazendo uma analogia com o momento em que o Napster distribuía conteúdo sem pagar direitos autorais. O que aconteceu? As gravadoras, que eram gigantes, processaram o Napster até quebrá-lo. A gente está vivendo um pouco o inverso disso. A gente tem grandes empresas infringindo direitos autorais e pequenas empresas tentando lutar contra isso. Então, é um cenário muito diferente. Mas tem uma coisa que em algum momento, a iTunes foi lá e falou, eu sei qual é, eu consigo achar um modelo de negócio que todo mundo fica feliz. E isso é uma coisa que a gente vai precisar responder. Como é que nós vamos fazer isso? Em termos de governança, em termos tecnológicos, o que precisa estar na lei? E esse, para mim, é um dos principais desafios que a gente precisa responder. O Tom dizia que a gente não pode ficar refém dos processos. A gente precisa estar à frente dos processos. E a meu ver, não adianta a gente não pode esperar, digamos, um projeto de lei ser aprovado dizendo que precisa ter o pagamento do jornalismo, sem a gente já estar avançando na discussão como é que isso vai acontecer, qual é a tecnologia que vai nos permitir fazer isso, e, inclusive se a tecnologia vai ser nacional e quantos intermediários vão tirar disso no meio do caminho. Porque o fato da gente se envolver nisso desde agora nos permite garantir que o jornalismo vai receber mais no modelo que a gente vai desenhar do que um monte de intermediários. Então, eu acho que isso é uma coisa que a gente precisa avançar rapidamente, acho que é uma das principais tarefas nossa, e isso é muito importante no debate no Congresso. Por quê? As pessoas usam má fé, né, na discussão. Então, o que você vê é empresas de tecnologia falando assim, eu não consigo negociar com cada veículo individualmente. Ué, mas ninguém falou que precisa fazer dessa forma. A gente precisa criar esse ecossistema, esse modelo, esse mercado, as tecnologias. Então, a gente precisa ter respostas também para os questionamentos que estão sendo feitos de como é que isso vai funcionar. Então, acho que esse é um elemento. Eu fico feliz que, se a gente pudesse sistematizar todo o evento e colocar assim digamos, no processo aí do desenvolvimento da incubadora, vai ser muito bom. Obrigada.
Right. Thank you very much, Marina. And next to her, we have Irene Liu, who has a long title, but it's shorter than Marina's. She is the Director of AI, Emerging Technology and Regulation at the International Fund for Public Interest Media. And before that, she had worked for Google News Lab leading them in the Asia Pacific region. And I think that automatically tells you why she's better suited to be in this panel. Over to you, Irene.
Thanks, Boo. Just gonna wait for my presentation to come up. Okay. So the topic here is really about how we survive and thrive in this new era that we're in. And I always like to start with some statistics, if possible, if this will click. But first, and this is a different version of Sergio's slide, which is that technology is fast-moving, transformative, cumulative, and user-centric. And for newsrooms, they are grappling with all of these, maybe not so much Web3, but pretty much everything else. And that is the challenge. It's really, really, really hard to keep up and also innovate on all of these fronts while serving our users who are operating on all of these fronts as well. So what does this mean for news organizations? I wanted to look at where the trends are right now as a way to project into the future. So this is from the Reuters news report, digital news report. You can see that for folks who are over 35, they roughly consume news through a number of different platforms, whether it's direct, social media, through search, and then other pieces. Under 35s, really, they have less of a relationship with news organizations. They really like to consume news through social media. Search is roughly the same, although I predict that things will change. What I think is more important is where we see the trends in the global south. If you look here, you can see that TikTok is used here much more at a much higher level for news consumption compared to markets like the US and the UK. YouTube also continues to grow when compared to other markets. And this to me is the most important slide, which is if you look by platform, Where are people getting news? Who are they getting it from? If you go onto X, Facebook, YouTube, mainstream news is still pretty much, and Instagram, mainstream news is still pretty much at the top. If you go all the way to TikTok, personalities and influencers, including politicians and others, but ordinary people. This to me is incredibly striking. People now they trust regular, ordinary people more than actually mainstream news on these platforms for news, which I think really speaks to where we're going. We all know this. In 2022, we got a huge shock and got all excited about ChatGPT and all the possibilities for inside the newsroom. Now we're really grappling in terms of sustainability on the impact of generative AI-powered search in its many forms. This is Google. Doesn't want to go. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Perplexity and Microsoft and Bing. So, looking ahead, where will people get news? They will get it through AI-mediated spaces where a human may or may not be in the loop. Friends and families, where the connection is the human. Although chatbots we may be communicating with bots more and more within chat apps as well. And then trusted voices, creators, influencers, politicians, and ordinary people. And why does this matter? Because the value exchange is shifting. We talked about the need to really consider news now as a public good. And I really loved, Stiley's quote that Michael referenced about how there is market failure, because we really need to think about public good because the business model, which has been breaking for 30 years, is really breaking now. And this question of the value exchange between the technologies that distribute our content and the news organizations that produce the content is shifting a lot. This is a very loud fan. So what are the implications for news publishers? I think the top line bullet here is really important, which is there is a blurring between journalism and information. I think that tech companies already and users blur these things. There's a whole kind of spectrum of that they group as all just information. It's either good or not good information, right? Tech companies also do that. There is a reason why Google has licensed with Reddit user-generated content for $60 million a year and has not licensed in the same way for journalistic content at the same level for AI purposes and others. If you think about what that means also, I think it's back, okay. If you think about what that means also for how journalism and professional news organizations need to think about their work. Are you guys still can't hear? Is it? It's kind of going in and out. Is this better now? Okay. Actually, I think this is okay. If I hold it at this exact angle, it should be fine. So the point of this issue is that news organizations also need to start thinking about broadening what they consider to be their business. Information, data is going to be the new opportunity. Thinking about what your data is in your archives, in the B-roll, in the full interview transcripts that you hold, also your knowledge of local communities, knowing where to get information that is not easily accessible online, and collecting it, structuring it, building clean data sets is going to be powerful. And I think that this is a really important point for where news organizations also need to go. We all know the other things we've heard about the other implications, and I'm running out of time, so I'm not going to go into this. I think that where the news industry needs to head is really to think about what they need to do to redefine journalism in the era of AI. So focusing on direct relationships with audiences, we've talked about this a lot already in this conference. Collaborating with news publishers and content producers, again, rethinking what our job is and where we fit in the information ecosystem, who are our allies. Right now, the spectrum between the attitude of the Wikimedia world where information is free, it should be available to everyone, to the realities of the news business and needing to find a way to pay for it through subscriptions and reader revenue. This is there needs to be a coming together and a figuring out of how to make the agenda of free information possible while also sustaining the cost to produce this information. Taking control of how your content is used, as we've heard in the panel before, the regulation is not set. We don't know where it will go. We have a role to play in where that will go, but we need to indicate to the world whether we want our content to be scraped or not. We need to indicate to the world through robots.txt and other mechanisms how we want our information to be used. If we don't do that, then we can't expect others to protect us for this. And we need to engage and advocate with regulators and tech companies. We know regulation is coming, or it may or may not come, but we should be taking part of that in that dialogue. And I think one thing that is really important and valuable is that this is a conversation that can and should come from the Global South. There should be cooperation. There are opportunities to work together. This is the reason why I think that there's an opportunity for our markets. For all the talk about US tech companies, I will reveal my bias of having lived in Asia for 14 years. These are dominant tech companies and tech platforms in Asia. Naver and Kakao are Korean. Gojek is Indonesia. Grab and Shopee are Singapore and Southeast Asia. WeChat is China. Line is Japan, Taiwan, Thailand, and that yellow one is Mongolian. These are dominant platforms in their markets because these languages are not important to the big tech companies. How does this happen? Because governments invest. They support homegrown tech. We need to be a part of this. Imagine a world where suddenly news organizations, public interest media, public interest information are co-building the technologies that our users and communities use. That's all I'll say. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irene, for that insight. And now we hand over to Michael Power, who is an attorney and is a director and co-founder of Power and Associates and Alta Advisory. He specializes in litigation and dispute resolution, legal advisory and negotiations, research and policy development, and law reform in the areas of information rights and media law, constitutional and administrative law. And Michael does work with a number of organizations in South Africa, including the Association for Independent Publishers and the South African National Editors Forum. Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Sabu. Thank you to the hosts for getting us here. It's a very well-run conference, and we're thankful for the opportunity to engage. And then I think thank you to the translators. You never get an adequate shout out, so thank you for keeping us connected. I just want to deal with two interim matters before I jump in, and it goes to the panel before us. I, Tom, am somewhat disagreeable to your provocations, but there is a slight nuance to it. I will say that we are spending too much time on new regulation. And where I'm agreeable with Courtney is that there are a raft of remedies that already exist that we're not properly tapping into. And the case of South Africa presently is that constitutional law, competition law, and I think we're seeing increasingly in the United States, copyright law is a trifecta of laws that we can rely on while we work on new regulation to continue to push back. So there is some good news coming out of the Global South. As Michael has said, it is halftime. We don't know what the second half is going to look like, but it's not all doom and gloom at this stage. I too am having a change. Can we change the slide, please? So I just want to bring us back quite briefly. And I think the problem we have with technology, and we've seen it for an extended period of time now, is that AI, the AI that we're innovating, what the tech platforms are doing, all falls outside of the scope of legality. The internet is the Wild West. Some people prefer that. Others don't, and I appreciate this is a continuing debate, but we have to accept that right now, particularly in the AI debate, legality does not apply. And sadly, with respect to some of our American colleagues, it seems that the doctrine of legality is a challenge at home as well. Now, when we look at this doctrine, I think it's the bedrock of what we understand into how we regulate this space. We need regulation. We don't want excessive regulation, but there need to be common agreements. If we could change the slide, please, by 2. And one more. I think we want to start grappling with the raft of existing remedies, which we have here on the right-hand side, and that's establishing social and political norms, values, and common agreements. I think it's where civil society spends a lot of its time, and it's where a lot of the conversation is ongoing. Here we're simply looking at constitutional international law and public policy. But there are 2 other areas of law which I think are somewhat underexplored and are getting a lot more prominence at the moment. The second is competition and antitrust law, which civil society, at least from the South African perspective, is only now starting to engage with as we grapple with social and economic rights developments in our country. And then the third area is copyright law, where we're seeing currently with New York Times versus OpenAI, a really substantial economic pushback by publishers. And really the long and short is, Tom, Courtney, others who are speaking about regulation, is while we work towards developing AI acts and frameworks, I don't think we should lose sight of what we already have in place at the moment. Not at all, thank you. And what we want to avoid is on the left-hand side, you see the language that is starting to inform AI regulation. Responsible, ethical, explainable. We've been trying to ask multinational corporations to be ethical for 100 years. I think we need to move past that threshold, right? We cannot measure ethics in law. We can measure reasonableness. And the current pre-existing codes have that. So while we develop our new regulation, let's be cautious not to fall into the trap of vagary, which plays against us. While we do want ethical tech, we in fact want rights-based tech. We are democracies, we work within a rights-based framework. And despite current assaults on that framework, I am hopeful that rights will outlive current versions of autocracy. So I think we need to keep shifting that language. We need to push away from responsible and ethical business practices to rights-based practices. And the primary reason for that is where there is a right, there must be a remedy. And that remedy must be effective. That, in effect, is people's power. Where there is a vague value system that comes through a conscious capitalist approach in San Francisco, it is often unclear what the remedy is. So a rights-based framework is not just something from a time gone by. It is a very important civic tool to ensure that effective remedies can be utilized for breaches of that framework. Now, I've listed here just a few of the rights at play and the rights that already exist in the world of social, search, and artificial intelligence. There are at least 8 international recognized human rights, which inform a lot of our constitutions, that have direct application to the online world. It is not a new world. It doesn't require a fantastically new normative framework, in my view. But it does require a reinterpretation of a lot of constitutional rights which were agreed to before the advent of the internet. There are 2 very clear competition or antitrust prohibitions on what we are starting to see now. I'm going to leave it to other colleagues from South Africa who will talk more broadly to the report that has just been published. But we simply find that AI, search, and social media has an adverse impact on the quality of consumer choice in South Africa. And I think speaking just briefly to the point that was made about Google being the 4th most viable or prominent company in Brazil, that may be so. The argument is not that we're saying Google cannot exist. We're saying, like the automobile, If Google wants to exist in Indonesia, Brazil, South Africa, you must have a certain degree of safety through, let's say, a seatbelt. You must drive on the right-hand side of the road, and you must have a security certification. We are not saying that the automobile cannot exist. We are saying that it must fall within commonly agreed social values, and I think our role is to start nudging and introducing those social values where we can. Now, just lastly, when we look at the remedies, we see there are a raft available to us. I appreciate people like Courtney take a very strong view on compensation, so be it. But there are multiple remedies that already exist that I think each one of us can deploy in our different contexts to move towards a world that we want. If we look at constitutional law, I think there's a lot of work to be done in developing policy, soft laws, regulation, and jurisprudence. I think there's a really significant question outstanding within the competition and constitutional law nexus about historical reparations for what has happened to the media and what can happen from there. I think we're seeing within competition law, and what our competition authority in South Africa has done very strategically is said, we will use the blunt instrument of the law through taxes, levies, and compensation. But before we do that, we're giving you the chance to change your technology and go have a conversation with others. And I think competition authorities can learn a lot from the approach in South Africa. It's still to be seen what will happen, no doubt, but remedies already exist. And then lastly, I think we should be supportive of the copyright challenges and both what is happening now with current content and I think the new frontier, which will be archival content, and how proper creative rights can be exercised over that data and information while ensuring a public interest in it. So with my last 20 seconds, I just want to turn to maybe where we are. A question was asked yesterday as to what this community must do with our limited resources. I can't answer that question, but I can say this community is too small. I think we need to look at broadening this community. My favorite Brazilian at the moment is not Neymar Jr. It's the judge who ordered the Twitter ban and whose ban was confirmed on appeal. This is a member of our community. We have judicial activists, we have civil society activists, we have publishers who are acting solely for commercial purposes, but who can contribute to our mission. And I think if we reconceptualize, rebalance the scales through pre-existing remedies and new regulation, we need to reimagine how journalists engage in the open world. People will pay for music. It is unclear whether they will pay for quality journalism. And then lastly, I think the overarching goal is to reclaim public faith and ultimately trust. Thank you so much, Sabu, for the time.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you for that input and the remedies that are available to us. And next is Dr. Kate Skinner, who is a media freedom activist and has previously chaired the board of the Freedom of Expression Institute in South Africa. And also she was a founder member of a lobby group called Save Our SABC, which was founded to support the public broadcaster in South Africa. Kate is currently the executive director of the Association of Independent Publishers. And she actually, on the issue of compensation, she recently negotiated a significant sustainability fund with Google funding to assist small publishers in South Africa. So let's hear what Kate has to share. Over to you, Kate.
So thank you for that introduction. Wonderful to be here. And what I wanted to do today is to look at 3 issues. So the first one is to very briefly tell you about AIP and the kind of publishers that we represent, because I think there's a potential for these publishers to do something very interesting in terms of tech issues. Second of all, to just very briefly to talk about the crisis that we face. And then third, to look at the solutions. So first of all, who is AIP? It's an organization that looks at tiny publishers across South Africa that basically publish in all the 11 official languages. We are in spaces that the mainstream media is basically not. we're in places such as rural areas, townships, small towns, and because we publish in all the 11 official languages, we basically speak to communities in the languages that they are most familiar with and feel are most credible and feel most trust in. So that's very briefly who AIP is. I think what is important to look at is then the absolute crisis that we as publishers find ourselves in this new tech world, which has become even more complicated now that AI is this new feature. So what has happened is that if you look at the statistics which we gathered in 2016, we had like 164 publishers, we had like 204 publications, we had 7.5 million copies, basically printed copies produced a month, which was over 20 million copies. Over 20 million readers. And if we look, what has happened now is we have similar numbers of publishers, similar numbers of publications, but a massive drop in terms of numbers of copies that are produced and readers. So we now only have 2.5 million copies, and so a huge drop in readership as well, a 15 million drop. So what we need to look at is what to do about that, and we're basically squeezed on two sides. On the one side, we're squeezed because, for instance, a lot of our communities are still literally trapped in a kind of print world, but can't go online, can't actually experiment with kind of podcasting, with YouTube, with going online, with being on websites, having websites, etc., which are not just static websites, because there's no money to be made there. And when you're a tiny operation, it's really difficult to adopt that new technology. So basically, you've got a situation where the news that you want to produce is desperately needed. It's trusted. It's in the languages that people want, and yet you can't move there. So, what do you do? What's the solution to this crisis? And I think what has been amazing, and thanks, for talking about it, Spoo. I mean, we have managed to, with Google, put together a fund. And I mean, it probably sounds like an incredibly small amount of money, because we're talking about $6 million over 3 years. And I mean, for a lot of people, that's wow, that's not a lot of money. For our publishers, it's a huge amount of money. And I think what is exciting about that is just some of the things that we've put in place in terms of what this fund is going to do. So this kind of interesting idea of being able to kind of leapfrog using AI. So what we can do with this funding is actually experiment. Take these tiny publishers and look at them using AI, not so to use it in terms of their own operations, their tiny operations, but also in terms of the content, also in terms of translations. So that's one of the kind of things that we can do. But also, it's not only looking at just the publishers getting funding, but also collective infrastructure. Looking at what industry level projects we can basically put in place. Just very briefly then, to just talk about the way that the fund is in fact structured. So Google, interestingly, has given the funding but is not on the board, actually plays almost no role in terms of dictating what we do with that money and what experiments we actually put in place. So I think that is something which I think is quite exciting. I think also there is an interesting issue around transparency. We are going to be really transparent. There's a huge lack of trust in South Africa around money, and particularly money to these kinds of tiny publications. We are going to say, these are the different publications that have got funding. This is how much funding they've got. All of that is going to be transparent. And of course, the admin fees, because that is always a big issue. And then maybe just to say, lastly, the issue around government's role in terms of these kinds of funds. And we have had huge debates around it, and we've actually put a government rep on the fund in terms of the oversight body. And that's because we believe that they need to be there, but they're one of 7 players. And having them only there as one of the 7 players, I think, means that you can get the benefits of them being there, but also not government dictating to you in terms of how the fund operates. So thank you for the opportunity. Basically, I'm putting it out there. We've got this fund. We're going to be experimenting. The doors are going to be opening in terms of applications in June. And watch the space. I'm hoping that we're going to learn a lot of interesting lessons. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kate. We look forward to seeing what you guys are going to do. And saving the best for last. There I'm trying to curry favor with the host of the next Control Plus J so that I'm invited. Our next speaker is Wahyu Diatmika, who is the CEO of Tempo Digital, and he also chairs the Indonesian Cyber Media Association, which is the association of digital media publishers in Indonesia. And he also oversees the programs for media capacity building and improving digital media quality in Indonesia. He is quite decorated. I will not go through his entire CV, but in 2015, he led the Panama Papers reporting in Indonesia, which was the collaborative cross-border investigative project initiated by the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Without wasting any more time, let me hand over to Wahyu.
Thank you, Sibu. I think with that, you definitely will be invited to Jakarta for the next Control J conference. Hi everyone. I'm going to use my 8 minutes to update everyone on the latest situation on the media and how do we strategize on surviving, because the topic is beyond survival. So hopefully this will be a sharing session where you can also give us feedback on what currently we plan to do. So a bit of a background. The current situation of AI usage in Indonesia, we can definitely categorize the use of AI among media into 3 types. So the first type mostly use AI to increase production volume. So creating SEO-based content using generative AI. I think most of our members, we have around 400 online media as member in across the country, is applying this model. The second type is a bit more advanced. So they're using AI tech to convert content from text to audio, text to video, and try to distribute the content more effectively. The third one is a bit more, is I think the most advanced. I think Arka, my colleague here from Indonesia, from Hukum Online, is using AI to create new product, like compliance-based framework for companies, and also other type of product that you really utilize the advanced AI technology. But the number of media who's in the third category is very, very limited. So in general, the challenges moving forward is we have a gap in knowledge. So a lot of media don't really realize if we keep using AI only to produce content, to increase volume of content, then it will create a vicious cycle where at the end, the content will fit to the large language model if it's being crawled by platforms, and then the outcome will be less accurate than it should be, because we as a publisher, we no longer go to the field doing original reporting, interviewing people. A lot of newsrooms really decrease the number of reporters who really doing field work, putting boots on the ground for journalistic work, because they believe they can minimize costs using AI. So that's the risk that most of the media doesn't really realize at the moment. But of course, there's also the flip side. The opportunity provided by by AI is also not realized by most of the publishers. If we can engage with AI platform and really, put the publishers in a format that can benefit both, I think that's also a big opportunity for media to go back to the origin of journalism, doing like factual reporting, on the ground reporting, to provide good quality content and data for AI platforms. This is a report from Reuters digital research a few months ago, and I think this also reflects the situation in Indonesia. Many publishers want to do a collective deal with a platform, but don't really put it high on the list. Only like 1/3 of publishers realize the importance of the potential of having AI as a revenue stream source for their sustainability. But when it comes to negotiation, a lot of us, I think 70% or more, believe that it needs to be a collective deal. So to respond to this situation, maybe just to give you a context, this is the only two regulation we have so far on the relation between platform and publishers. The first one is, I think most of you have heard that we have a presidential decree on the responsibility of platform for quality journalism issued by the president last year in February. A few weeks ago, the committee to implement that decree has issued a technical guideline to frame the negotiation between platform and publishers. I've talked to several platforms representative in Indonesia, and most of them welcome the technical guidelines, so they have no outright objection, and they are now still consulting with their legal team, but I don't see any immediate opposition towards the technical guideline, and they are willing to move forward to the next step, which is the negotiation. So I'm optimistic that we'll see some result in the few weeks to come. And then the Press Council just issued a regulation on how newsroom has to use AI. It's quite normative, human-centric approach on using AI in content production. But we don't have enough regulation on copyright protection. So I think Michael's point on really using existing law is really important. We currently haven't really looked into how we can use copyright law to protect our content. On the infrastructure support, as an association, we prepare several program. First, we have already an aggregator website where we pull content from our members. So we hope that this can be the beginning of a content database, which we can then engage with potential partners from AI platforms, because it will be easier for the platform if we already have this kind of infrastructure for our content in Indonesia. And secondly, we are also discussing potential collaboration with an AI platform, a local AI platform. I think Irene mentioned there is a local unicorn called Goto, Gojek, and they are developing a local language, large language model for Indonesian, and they are discussing with several publishers to use their archive as a training model. And once we can, this is an open source model, and they are open to utilize this technology once the fine tuning is completed for the media. So if we kind of try to connect the two, the database, the content database that we already established with the generative AI open source engine that we currently in discussion with, hopefully then as an association, we can then generate new product using this collaboration. Lastly, we are also working with IFPIM to do a feasibility study on a national trust fund. And hopefully this can be also a mechanism where platforms can engage with publishers to talk about engagement and collaboration. So I think that's a brief update of what we are planning in Indonesia, and looking forward for any feedbacks and response from everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wayu. And thank you to the rest of our panelists, colleagues. There's a lot to chew on, and I'm sure you also have some inputs to give and also some questions. So in the interest of time, I will take hands, and please keep it brief. Just introduce yourself briefly and then shoot your question. If it's directed at a particular panelist, please say so. If not, I'll use my decree. Thank you.
Bom, eu vou me apresentar brevemente. Sou Fernanda Campagnucci, do Internet Lab, aqui do Brasil. Queria agradecer as falas muito inspiradoras. A gente vai costurando as ideias ao longo de todos os painéis. Um comentário e uma pergunta, né? O comentário, eu queria dialogar com o Michael sobre essa aparente dicotomia que tem sido falada, né? Se a gente já está perdendo tempo discutindo novas regulações, deixando de aplicar remédios já existentes. Eu não sou do campo do direito, apesar do Internet Lab ser uma grande referência em direito e tecnologia, né? Eu tenho uma outra trajetória, mas pensando em termos de estratégia política e de narrativa, para a gente comunicar os problemas e para a gente construir a solução, né, de remédios com a sociedade, me parece que a discussão de novas regulações, novos marcos regulatórios, como o que a gente está fazendo aqui no Brasil, é muito importante para conectar aqueles 3 nexos que você falou. É uma arena de discussão política que conecta, né, que junta os setores. O processo de fazer esse debate, ele também tem uma externalidade, que é conectar a sociedade, promover conexões. Então, acho que, saindo dessa dicotomia, entender que, apesar de não ser estritamente necessário, o processo de dialogar uma regulação nova para o novo contexto tem se mostrado muito frutífero para isso, né? A gente só não pode cair na armadilha de falar só de Big Tech e de deixar de reforçar aquilo que a gente quer, né? Então, esse é só um comentário também, se quiser dialogar. Mais uma pergunta mais específica para a Marina, também dizer que agradecer, né? A gente estava discutindo no evento preparatório, aqui junto com a Wikimedia Foundation, essa conexão entre o conhecimento livre e o jornalismo, e um dos pontos que a gente levantou seria muito bom se o Estado pudesse fomentar a pesquisa e a inovação de pequenas iniciativas ou de iniciativas emergentes e beber do campo da ciência aberta, do public money, public code, né, outras experiências do campo do conhecimento aberto para fazer isso. Então, a pergunta é: como que a gente viraliza essas soluções? Vocês estão pensando no próximo passo da incubadora? Sim, tem requisitos para essas experiências, esses modelos alimentarem realmente, serem replicadas, né, serem abertas? Então, essa é uma pergunta para a Marina.
All right. I think, Michael, I don't know if you have a response to a point, and then Marina.
Thank you. And
Sure.
I mean, I agree entirely that this is a space for dialogue. I suppose the fundamental point I'm making, and it really goes to the strategy behind the 3 convenings and potentially the 4th, is that there is a raft of action that is necessary, right? There is the world of new regulation. There is the world of enforcing remedies. There is the political world. There is the world of innovation. And, you know, what I would welcome seeing at the end of this process is a manifesto that engages with all of these worlds, so that organizations at the end of this year, at the end of these convenings, can go out into the world and we can collectively pursue a common vision without having gatekeepers and without having a centralized command. You know, Tom spoke about distributed work. That is the reason that the international human rights movement worked. It's also the reason why those who prefer centralized power are attacking it. But they're going to have a tough time because of its distributed model. So I agree entirely. I'm not, you know, singing an ode in favor or one of the other approaches. All of them need to work together. And if we can leave the end of this year with a manifesto that is considered enough for all of us to go into the world and make change, I think we would have achieved something really special. I just wanted to give a different perspective to new regulation and innovation.
Right. Thank you, Michael. Marina?
Tá? Ótimo. Obrigada, Fernanda, pela pergunta. Primeiro, eu queria só dizer uma coisa, como a mesa era sobre inteligência artificial, eu acabei focando nisso, mas a gente precisa reconhecer que o jornalismo no Brasil ele é desigual e a gente vai ter a TV Quilombo, que faz tripé de bambu e desenvolve tecnologias a partir de uma ancestralidade, e a gente tem gente que está nessa fase de implementação de inteligência artificial, e, enfim, que a gente acho que tem muito a entender aí com as experiências da Indonésia e tal. Então, quando a gente fala dessa incubadora, a gente também tem que entender isso. Certamente, a gente, ao reconhecer essa diversidade e desigualdade no jornalismo, assim como no país, a gente precisa pensar nessa perspectiva de ciência aberta, de códigos abertos, de disseminação de tecnologia, e nesse sentido a gente vai contar muito com o apoio da comunidade. Então, e aí, enfim, acho que não é também entender o que funciona para quem, entendendo essa diversidade de soluções, mas certamente está no nosso radar, não desenvolvido, mas em projeto, e gostaríamos de lançar nesse sentido, com certeza.
Thank you very much, Marina. I will take another question.
Ana from Colombia, from El 20. I'm going to ask my question in English because it's for Michael and Irene. Michael, I was thinking about what you said regarding existing regulation. The problem that we have with litigation in Colombia and in Latin America, we have the jurisdictional issue when facing the platforms, and it's like a denial to speak with us. You can go sue us in San Francisco. We can't. So we have no judicial dialogue with them, and this is a very problematic. I'm sorry if it gets too judicial, this question, but we haven't solved it. We can't solve it. We see no way. So I agree completely on the new regulation. We don't need new regulation on everything, but how could we manage with the existing regulation of that jurisdictional issue? And Irene, I wanted to ask you, we have been approached by private sector initiatives, and they tell us we want to inform and to form these social media influencers that are becoming like journalists, common journalism. I don't know how to say it, but they are perceived as journalists. When we go to them, they don't want it. They want us to tell them how to make a cool video, how to be seen, how to have views, but they don't want to learn about journalism. Most of the cases, obviously, I'm generalizing, but have you thought about what strategies to let them know and convince them that this is good for them? Not only for the one is that's funding the project, but for and for the public discourse, but for them. Have you thought about that approach? How can we convince them that they need this? Thank you.
Okay, two very good questions. Go ahead, colleagues.
So thank you. It's a fundamentally important question to this whole debate, and I won't delve too deep into the legalese, but to say that we're working on two cases in South Africa at the moment that center around the economic effects doctrine. Now, we have the benefit in South African law that we have statutory jurisdiction over any activity through our competition authority, any activity that has an economic effect in the Republic of South Africa. Now, the exact notion of what an economic effect is currently before our highest appellate court, the Constitutional Court, and that case involves a range of international banks who don't have a fixed presence in South Africa, but whose conduct had an economic effect in South Africa. Now, more practically, the case that we're trying to set up, and we're still looking for the right facts, is attaching the advertising revenues of platforms that flow through a jurisdiction to found jurisdiction, right? The primary principle is that if you're going to enforce a court order, you need something to enforce it against. Do you go claim the desk, the laptop? But if we can start claiming the advertising revenues that flow through our jurisdictions and exercise jurisdiction that way, I think we very quickly bring our opposition to the negotiating table. So the strategy for litigators, I think, is twofold. From a policy standpoint, it's to try and introduce the economic effects doctrine either through legislation or through jurisprudence. Step one. Step two is then trying to find ways, and creative ways, undoubtedly, to attach advertising and other revenues to compel enforcement.
Thank you, Michael. Irene?
Thanks for your question. I think that, to be honest, the ordinary people creator nexus with journalism is a very tricky one, and it's something that has not really been invested in, except to say we should just train journalists to act like creators. We should train creators to be more journalistic. And I do think that journalism does have a marketing problem. I think that it has a distribution problem. It has a trust problem. It has many of these problems. And we don't learn enough from other industries in this way. And this also extends to applications in AI. Every AI and journalism conversation or conference I go to, it's news organizations talking about how they are using AI, and very rarely, hearing how industries are investing their millions and millions of dollars in applying AI to the ad industry, to banking, to other things. And I think that that's one thing. I'm digressing. My point to the creators is I think that we also need to, we used to think, okay, well, people will just read our content because they're listening to the radio, they're watching TV, they're, reading the newspaper. Let's be honest, they were glazing over the front page to get to the sports section. Hopefully they would get a little bit. So it was just because it was there. I think that we need to adopt PR techniques, and we need to think about how we market content. So analysis of the world of creators. And Rappler in the Philippines is a very good example. They treat content and facts in a social marketing framework. They look to see who are engaging in conversations, whether they're big, influencers or even nano influencers, and then try to do research or outreach to these organizations. If news organizations spent half as much time creating their content as they did in promoting it through these channels and identifying commonalities, I think that that's a really important. It's yet another thing to do, but marketing, the industry of marketing in a news organization has rapidly changed, and I think this is actually something that a lot of big legacy news organizations struggle with. Their marketing teams were used to selling ads on their own homegrown platforms, whereas now we need to think the way that kind of digital marketers think. And so to me, those are the areas of opportunity. I will say that there has not been enough research or investment in this space, and it's something that I think we would also like to kind of go into as well.
Okay, I guess we're still at C. Let me come this side. I'll come to you, Tom. There's a question? Yeah, go ahead.
Obrigada, bom dia. Eu sou Raiza Cetra, sou co-diretora executiva da Artigo 19 Brasil e América do Sul. Eu vou falar em português, mas a minha pergunta tem muita relação com o que a Irene e o Michael estavam trazendo, sobretudo a parte final da sua fala, Irene. Mas acho que também Marina e os demais palestrantes talvez tenham algo para fazer a gente pensar. Desde ontem, eu fiquei pensando bastante sobre que talvez tenha um componente da conversa que a gente precise ter, que é o papel do Estado nisso tudo. A gente está falando sobre interesse público e sobre um bem público todo o tempo, né, desde ontem. E acho que está muito fácil, muito tranquilo para nós a ideia de um papel maior do Estado na regulação, na distribuição. Mas quando vem para o mercado, eu acho que talvez a gente ainda não tenha desenvolvido, ou pelo menos não nós na Artigo, e eu tenho pensado bastante sobre isso, que qual é o papel do Estado em criar o mercado, em desenhar as tecnologias. Então, eu estou pensando no papel do Estado no mercado e na inovação. E a sua fala final sobre a Ásia me deu o gatilho final, Aaron. E seria muito importante ouvir, porque eu acho que, do ponto de vista de inteligência artificial, a gente está com esse debate colocado e não colocado quando a gente pensa nos grandes produtores dessa tecnologia. E qual seria o papel do Estado? Num mundo em que o autoritarismo avança e ocupa o Estado, agregamos um elemento mais de complexidade. Mas eu fico me perguntando que, nesse conflito entre liberdades e intervenção estatal, que talvez a gente esteja precisando sofisticar um pouco mais essa presença e que talvez o papel também esteja no desenho das tecnologias, né, e na redistribuição que essas tecnologias possam permitir, se a gente entende elas como um bem público essencial. Então, qual é o papel do Estado nisso? Essa era a minha pergunta. Obrigada.
Right, thank you very much. Marina?
Oi, pronto. Eu também tenho pensado muito sobre isso e gostaria de voltar a um ponto que a inovação é uma atividade de alto risco. Então, quando a gente pode coordenar esforços, a gente precisa de diversidade e de coordenação quando a gente fala de inovação, que é uma coisa, enfim, não é simples de fazer essas duas coisas acontecerem ao mesmo tempo. Então, eu acho que o papel do Estado é muito nesse sentido. E no outro, um papel de padronização também. Então, de criação dessa institucionalidade, governança e ferramentas tecnológicas que vão dar suporte a uma proposição legal, por exemplo, né? E aí, então, enfim, eu acho que certamente, e o campo do jornalismo, eu acho que ele é muito desafiador nisso que você traz, porque, pelo menos no Brasil, eu sinto que a vontade de diálogo com o Estado, de reconhecer o Estado como um ator relevante e que pode ser benéfico, não é simples, né? Inclusive por conta do histórico da relação do Estado com a imprensa. Então, a gente precisa construir esse novo Estado de fato que promove a sustentabilidade do jornalismo, respeitando a sua independência, enfim, entendendo qual é seu papel, qual é o papel da indústria, da autorregulação da indústria, inclusive, enfim, das próprias associações. Só queria frisar que esse papel do Estado ele é ainda mais relevante porque a gente está desenvolvendo um modelo de regulação que não quer deixar ninguém para trás. Então, não é um modelo de opt-out, é um modelo que estabelece a obrigação de remuneração pela mineração de dados e textos. E isso significa que a gente vai ter que lidar com o desafio de trazer todo mundo e fazer todo mundo receber. Né? Não é só meia dúzia ali que digamos, vai fazer a negociação no particular. Então, acho que esse aumenta o desafio de trabalhar com toda essa cadeia, com toda essa governança e juntar o mercado para fazer essa discussão e encontrar caminhos.
Right. Anyone else wants to take a stab at that before I go to Tom?
Yeah.
The last question, okay. Irene?
Yeah, so I'd love to respond because I think that if you take pure journalism and its interaction with the government, it is a very, very tricky relationship because it's about power, it's about influence, it's about capture. There are so many considerations. I think what is the opportunity is when we talk about technology in journalism, there are many Venn diagrams where there are overlapping interests and then separate interests. And when I think about how governments and regulators are grappling with AI as an economic development issue, they are also in a very, no offense, but I think my sense on some of this is that many governments are in a kind of reactive mode. They're saying, come to our countries, we will provide your data centers. Please, big tech companies, come and invest in us and build your chips here and that sort of thing. And I think that there needs to be also in this a consideration of that it's not, yes, the foundation models, the big tech, they are a big part of this ecosystem, but the opportunities for economic development, particularly local economic development, are in small LLMs, small applications that are very focused on consumers in a given market, solving problems in public infrastructure using these technologies. And this is not a lack of imagination, only this is a universal lack of imagination and lack of focus. I think that, there is a world where we, with allies, advocate and say, if you were going to build a data center in support to try to attract this outside investment, 30% of that data center should be used for subsidized, access for local homegrown technologies, right? This is how countries that have fostered homegrown tech have built this. As a bit of a random, one of my references is that my family moved to China in 1995. My dad helped to build one of the first joint ventures for an American company in China. And from the very beginning, the vision of the Chinese government was, yeah, you're going to come here and you're going to access our markets, but we get our pound of flesh. You get access to our markets, we're going to get your tech, we're going to get your, what you know and your processes, and now you can see that 20 years, 25 years on, they've built their own industries. Not to say that this is all about sovereignty and kind of closing borders and things like that, but I think that that's one of the attitudes that we need to take, which is, sure, there's this opportunity from the global scale, but how can we build from the ground? And for news organizations and public interest media, if these technologies rely on our information, then it doesn't have to only be a cash deal. It can be, you want to build this together? Okay, let's get 20%. Let's own the fact that we have something that's of value. Partnership doesn't have to only be transfer of cash. It can be looking into the future as well.
Thank you, Irene. Colleagues, please, I plead for your indulgence. Tom, that's the last question. Did you have a hand? You still have it?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. Okay. Well, you are the convener, so yeah. All right. Okay, right after Tom, it will be Paula, as long as you know that that question stands between us and lunch. Thanks.
I'll be very short. First of all, Michael, thank you for taking my glib and quite contrary contribution earlier in the way it was intended. I wanted to mention that in September in New York, the fact that there's any language in the Global Digital Compact on media freedom, on diversity, on pluralism, on access to information is because of actors in the Global South. When Russia tried to remove that language, it was African member states who mobilized. And so I want to point out that this year we have the World Summit on Information Society happening in Geneva. And again, we have to fight that battle to make sure that SDG 16 is mentioned, that what we were able to achieve in the GDC is there, so we can make sure that the future of internet governance includes these key mentions of media and its contribution. And so I would ask everyone here to consider how they can reach out to their own governments to persuade them in Geneva and in the opportunities between now and then to be making that positive case.
Thank you, Tom. Paula?
Thank you very much. Wahyu, você mencionou um decreto presidencial E eu queria que você dividisse mais com a gente sobre qual foi o papel do ecossistema de mídia, se teve alguma influência em relação a como vocês trabalharam para conseguir esse decreto presidencial ou não, considerando que a Marina falou aqui da delicadeza da relação da sociedade civil com o Estado, e queria também te perguntar sobre o envolvimento de outras áreas do governo. A gente aqui convidou a SECOM, mas a gente convidou também o Ministério da Fazenda. Então, como outras áreas do governo que a princípio não estão imediatamente ligadas ao tema do jornalismo podem se envolver com esse tema?
Thank you, Paula. I guess the presidential decree was an outcome of different interests that kind of merged together at the end, and this is not the best outcome that we expected in the beginning, because the first draft that was submitted by the media ecosystem from different associations was very clear and very clear and practical on the need for algorithm accountability, for instance, on the leveraging the publishers' bargaining positions toward the platforms. We learned a lot of the content from the Australian bargaining code, to be honest, because that was the trigger. When Australia first came out with the bargaining code, then several of us in Indonesia thought that this is something that we need to also try to have. But I think at the end of the day, we opt for a presidential decree, because if we go to the parliament, then that will be a very long process. There is a lot of negotiation and lobbying that needs to take place. But also, I think what's important in Indonesia that makes it different is the existence of our press council, because at the press council we have 11 association as constituents. So the constituents are Publishers Association, Journalistic Union, and also members of the civil society. So we kind of have this a framework where we can negotiate within the media ecosystem. I think that's really make it easier for us to coordinate and have a same aspirations when we negotiate with the government. Of course, the government have their own interests and their own motive in agreeing to issue this regulation. There is a lot of back and forth. At one point, the new president, Prabowo Subianto, even said to us, okay, now if you think this regulation is not strong enough, just let me know what you want. What the publishers want. If you want me to kick out all the platform, we can do that together. So he's very nationalistic kind of president, but of course there is string attached. So as a independent publishers association, we also need to be aware that there is give and take in the process, and we really need to do our best with whatever we have. And I think the presidential decree is not the best. It really served one purpose. It opened the door for negotiation. But what happened in the negotiation is really up to the publishers and platforms. And we still have to wait whether the outcome will be positive for the publishers.
Thank you very much. Wahyu, Marina, our host, government, would like to have the final word. Let's get kicked out of here.
Não, eu pedi a palavra, na verdade, para dizer que o governo brasileiro trabalhou fortemente para as questões de pluralidade e diversidade midiática, inclusive no Global Digital Compact, e que nós trabalhamos fortemente nesse tema na agenda do G20 e que gostaríamos de continuar sendo parceiros nessa agenda com a sociedade civil e com os governos. Acho que é importante registrar esse papel e um pouco de como a gente conseguir construindo juntos. Então, acho que essa foi uma importante iniciativa para nós. É uma oportunidade imensa poder sentar com todo mundo aqui. Só isso. Obrigada.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to each and every one of you.